Hello there. This is going to be one part mail video and one part repair video because I was sent something really cool. A Wyse WY-250 by Philip in La Rose, Louisiana. Except this did not go that well. And, well, before we get into this, I'll just say there's a reason I usually try to avoid shipping CRTs. Now, normally, I like to open the packages on camera for the first time because that makes it the most interesting, but being a CRT terminal, it felt prudent to open it beforehand while it was still close to the shipping date, get an idea of what condition it was in. And before the shipping, oh my gosh, it is absolutely fantastic. We'll hopefully find out more about it here. But when it comes to this part, this is where it gets unfortunate because that is the telltale sign of a blown CRT. This is somewhat heartbreaking to me because there are a finite number of CRTs left in the world, and as far as I'm aware, no one is making new ones. VDC has also stopped selling new old stock ones. So every time this happens, it's one more device taken out of commission. Now that said, I've not had a dead CRT on the channel before, so this gives us a unique opportunity to do a post-mortem analysis on a CRT to get a better feel for how they are put together and how they look. Now, this shape here is kind of interesting because you'll notice that it's kind of gray here and then black here. Well, if I move the CRT, you actually are seeing inside of it in this area. Normally, CRTs have a phosphor coating on the display, and it's not very thick or held on very well because CRTs are a vacuum. What happens when the neck snaps, like what happened on this CRT, is that air rushes into the tube, and it usually all blows right on the center of the tube, leaving a spot right there. This one was really extreme, and it kind of blew out more of this. But we can see this is actually these white lines here, the shape of the inside of the tube going up to the sides of the monitor. And we can also see the dark hole in the middle is the neck, and that's where it snapped, unfortunately. Now, I want to do a little bit more investigating here, but we have to figure out how to get in. Now, I think Philip actually figured out how to get into this thing deeper, but for the moment, I just want to see the back of the neck here. And I think we can take off the back with just plastic snaps. Yes. So this is where it failed. This is the yoke, and that controls the deflection of the beam. The yoke is made out of copper windings to form electromagnets. This would be part of the vertical deflection because it is on the vertical axes to the tube. But it's also very heavy because it is a giant lump of copper, and that appears to be what snapped here, because if I take this apart, we can see that is exactly where the tube let go. Now, with the yoke set to the side, I can actually demonstrate something unique with monochrome CRTs like this one. If I take a flashlight and put it behind it, you can see straight through the tube. That's because monochrome CRTs are normally a pure vacuum straight from the electron beam to the phosphor coating on the backside of the glass. This is different to a color tube because a color tube has an aperture grill or a slot mask of some kind that is used to control which phosphor colors that the beam hits, giving you the red, green, and blue colors that make up all of the natural colors that you see when you look at it from a distance. Monochrome CRTs like this do not have the slot mask inside of them, which makes them constructed completely differently. It's one reason why monochrome CRTs like this are usually a lot lighter than a color CRT, because there's just literally less metal inside of them. And being metal is also the reason that color CRTs are susceptible to being magnetized. You have this metal sheet right behind the glass, and that, if you've ever held up a magnet to the screen and seen it distort in all sorts of funny colors, is what can be magnetized to permanently damage the tube of the display. A monochrome CRT like this, you can distort the image with the magnet, but there is nothing here to be permanently magnetized, so it's mostly safe to do that. Now this speckled area here is a thin metal coating on the inside of the tube that the anode actually connects to form the positive side of the connection. I don't know if it's possible to magnetize that because it's so thin. Theoretically, that should be possible, but I feel like in practice it would be extremely difficult. So that is something to keep in mind, that you probably still shouldn't just wave a magnet all around a CRT, but on monochrome tubes it would be a lot less damaging. Now, I'm curious how much we can see if I can remove the back neck from the yoke here. So I'm going to attempt to do that. Unfortunately, I think all of the glass up above completely disintegrated. I can't see anything in there. So I'm going to try to loosen this and take it out, because we should have the entire control section for the electron emitter intact. It's interesting, the tape is browned up here. The CRT will have a heater element to this side of the cathode, and you can actually see that lit on a CRT if you take a look back here while it's on. So it doesn't surprise me to see that all browned out. This is very crispy tape, though. This is not going to be easy to remove, to see what's going on behind it. And here we have the fully visible electron gun. So let's walk through how this actually works. At the first stage here at the end, we have the heater that I was talking about. And again, you can actually see these light up when you look inside of a tube while it's on. It's a very simple first check you can do to see if a CRT is working, even if the screen is blank, because the heater will always be on. Then we start to get into the stuff that actually controls the electrons that come out of it. Now, we have two phases here. We have the electron emitting section and the control grid. Now, the control grid might look like that it's connected to the beam emitter, but if I get a light behind this at just the right angle, you should be able to see that there is a full air gap. And while these are both negatively charged, these are still on the beam emission and control side of this. I'll note while I'm here that you'll see these plastic strips going along the side of the tube. These should be dielectric material that is non-conductive, and they're just used to hold the different elements along the tube. After that, we get into the anode materials. Now, the difference between the cathode side and the anode side is the polarity in which it's charged. Everything after the control grid here is all positively charged. This draws the negatively charged electrons to the front of the tube. Matter of fact, you can see here, this is the part of the tube that has that metallic coating that I was talking about, and there are tabs here that would have been touching it to continue the positive charge from the anode cup into this section. Now, the different stages of the anode are responsible for different functions, but the two primary things that this does is accelerate the beam and focus it. Now, an interesting fact about the focusing on CRTs is that the purity of the vacuum is a very significant function of the minimum focus capability of a CRT, because the more air molecules are inside of the CRT, the more the electrons get bounced around as they go through the air inside. Now, you'll never get a 100% pure vacuum. It's just not physically possible because you can't go in there and scoop out all of the air molecules. You only create a vacuum by creating a difference in pressure, and the lower pressure area that you create can only be so strong of a vacuum, and then they'll reach equilibrium, and then what few air molecules are left will still be floating around in there. Now, of course, we do get very close to pure vacuums because we can get some really high resolution CRTs, but they'll never really be perfect. And especially on older CRTs, you'll see that the minimum focus dot size that you can get can be fairly large. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. The minimum focus size is related to the purity of the vacuum of the CRT. Now, our vacuum here is none. So if we powered this at just right here, we would just get a random spray of electrons all over, and almost none of them would realistically make it coming out of the front. So powering this would be completely useless. Even if we had a phosphor thing to point it at, it would just be a, amorphous blob without any real defined shape. Now, this also gives you an idea of what the different pins on the back of the CRT go to. Some of them go to the heater to form the electrons. Some of them go to the different control stages along inside of the gun here. but none of them really go any farther out. Everything ends at this point. From there, the controls for the CRT are outside of the glass, which is where the yoke comes into play. But I'll mention first, before we go any farther, because this just kind of looks like a lump of wires all touching there without any insulation. But this is actually something called an enamel-coated magnet wire. There's a very thin coating on the wire that insulates it from itself. This can be damaged, and I don't know if this will have happened to this. I do see some particles in the coil right there, so hopefully this is not damaged, but it's hard to say. Now inside of here, we can actually see 4 different magnetic coils. This is one loop right here. This is one loop right there. And then there's the other 2 loops on the top and bottom that I mentioned earlier. These are the horizontal deflection coils here. The vertical deflection coils are more visible on the outside. These are magnetic and are what push the beam around once it gets through the electron gun. So if we pretended that this was fully connected right here, the CRT would emit electrons here. They would go through the different anode acceleration and focusing control mechanisms there, get to here approximately, and then the yoke would start to deflect them into the different directions that they would go. Now, how the CRT beam is deflected is defined by this circuit board back here that controls the deflection coil. On a display like this, it's using raster technology. So that means it's going to start out at the top of the tube, which would be this way, move its way across, and then step back down one line and move its way across again. A vector tube is identical in the control mechanisms. You have the same exact yoke, deflection coil, beam emitters, and all that stuff, but the control circuitry behind it is what's different. Because instead of doing raster scans, it just sends analog signals to this directly that directly correlate to where it wants the beam to be. Well, I think that's about as much as we can glean from the unfortunately destroyed tube here. I want to make it clear, I don't blame Philip for this. Shipping these is difficult, and they put a lot of effort and expense into shipping that thing. This was really murdered by the shipping services, so there was not a lot we could have done. But this isn't the end of the story here, because I received another package from Philip in La Rose, Louisiana. And that would be this. This is a spare tube. Now, I just have to say that I am extraordinarily appreciative of not only having sent the terminal in the first place, but going through the effort of shipping an entire second tube, okay? It was kind of a miracle that they had a spare that should be compatible with this, and I'm fingers crossed hoping that it's still good in here. As of filming this, I don't know. Now, in reality, if you're watching this, that probably means that it was fine. So hopefully it'll all be fine. But for right now, I'm on pins and needles because I don't know. The only indication that I have is that it's totally silent inside, and I think that means that there's no shattered glass. So I'm about to open this for the first time, and we're going to see if I can breathe new life into this thing. Now, Philip spent a lot more time on packaging this CRT because it is a loose CRT in here. So this is going to be a little bit of a different unboxing experience here to avoid, well, yeah. So I've been given specific lines to cut along here and places to not cut specifically. I dig the artwork, by the way. So I'm going to be following the very particular directions that I was given on how to open this. But man, the shipping companies really tried again to kill this thing. This has been quite the ordeal to get this going. But let's find out what I'm in for. Well, my understanding is that this is encased in multiple layers to help try and preserve it, so there's going to be a lot of packing material here. And this isolated box that can move around is probably the necessary thing to prevent this from happening, because that provides some cushion to allow things to shift internally instead of having all of that translate into the yoke. But some bonus items of PCMCIA network cards were included with this as well. Give you a view from that angle. There it is. Firmly still on there. There we are. First, a quick glance. Oh, it's perfect. Oh, this has been an ordeal of a long project. Oh, man. I don't think it'll matter too much. Only a very minor thing. I would recommend covering the anode area. But in this case, the way it was packed, I don't think it mattered. But yeah. Okay. Now it's on me. Now, Philip's also given me some advice on how to do this, because it is not obvious at all. If you look around this terminal, there are literally no screws visible anywhere on it. It's kind of impressively designed. But it turns out there is one right here on the foot, and then there are plastic snaps that are going to come out along the bezel in order to remove it from the front. And then we can get to the mounting tabs for the CRT to remove the existing one and then install the new one. So I'm going to start out by removing this screw and then work on unlatching all of the tabs all over this thing. Ah, there we go. Jeez. I had to go really far. Oh, there's so much broken glass. LED for the front. I should go ahead and remove the anode cap now as well. So if I peel this back, you can kind of see that the anode is just a metal clip with a rubber protector over it. So all you need to do to remove this is just pinch this and then pull it out. It's literally just the wire bent over with this metal thing contacting the inside of the glass tube that has that metal coating on it. All right, and now it appears everything is just plastic snaps. So let's try and work on this. Oh, that's a cakewalk. Once you know how. Okay, it also didn't go quite in like I expected. All right. There is more broken glass and stuff. All right, well, from here, this couldn't be much more straightforward. All right, new tube time. To set expectations here, this is not actually a new tube. This is another tube from a similar one of these, I believe, that had other issues. So this is technically a salvage tube. I don't like the sounds I'm hearing. I want to actually wet wipe this. Make sure there's no broken glass. Yep, some more tiny bits in there. I think that's it. Oh boy. Oh man, I'm excited. Yeah, this goes the other way around. That makes sense. Ah, yeah, that's not a problem at all. And plug in the neck board so I know the cable is retained. And then deflection coil. And the anode cap, which is as simple as you would guess. You just got to hook it in and then make sure you get the other leg clipped in. All right. That's attached. I don't think I have any reason not to try firing it up now. So, put the cover on the back. Now, this is the power button on the side, which is kind of awesome. Power connector, standard grounded mains for the US. I'm gonna go ahead and plug it in and we'll see what happens. All right, here we go. there are brightness and contrast knobs over here. Might also not like not having the keyboard connected. I'll go ahead and plug that in. Yeah, that reddish orange glow in the center is the heater, so it is working there. I'm going to cut myself off here in the middle of trying to get this thing working, because it turned out as soon as I had the CRT connected, it was actually fully fixed and functional, but there was a difference in the calibration requirements between the new amber CRT and the old, I believe, green phosphor CRT. So I ended up having to go through and tweak and tune all of the pots on the board to end up with the display being visible and then looking right. And this took me about an hour and a half of off and on and tuning in different lighting levels and just getting to the point where I was really happy with it. But the new CRT was absolutely working great, and it turned out to be in really good shape. It's a couple days later now, and I've had some time to get to know this terminal, and wow, it is my new favorite terminal to use. Don't get me wrong, TRS-80 DT1 is still my favorite terminal to look at, but I have nothing that beats this one as far as functionality. Oh my gosh, it's perfect. I just am so happy with it. So let's go over what using this is like. Now I'm going to state I'm a Linux user, which always brings up comments in the video description of people like, oh, Linux users always have to tell people about that, but it's directly relevant to the content of the video. That's the only time I ever mention it. So we're going to start up aGetty over here on the laptop. Now, aGetty is a terminal TTY interface. It allows you to set up a serial port to connect to a specific kind of terminal. Now, before we get into that, let me really quick give you an idea of what we're up against. We have this selection of different terminals to be able to choose from, listed out here in the term info stuff. Now, there's another command that I no longer remember that tells you what the exact terminal capabilities are, but long story short, these are term cap entries that are listed over here. So I saw VT100, VT102, which actually I saw in the IBM RT video. That thing was cool. VT220, VT52. This can't emulate VT52, by the way, but it emulates VT100 most importantly. But there are a lot of different terminals, including some Wyse terminals, but unfortunately not the Wyse-520, which is what this is. I said 250 earlier in the video. It's a 520. I was looking at the number upside down. My brain failed to flip the numbers around. Now, there are a lot of terminals that are missing, unfortunately, that you might be able to recognize. Actually, I think this is even a reduced term cap entry set, but these files are the terminal definitions of the escape sequences that are sent to the terminal to control different things like where the cursor is positioned, when characters are sent, how to handle line wrapping, blinking, and all that kind of stuff. And you need to have those defined for every kind of terminal. Where this thing is awesome is that if I press F3, I can go into the general settings here, and I can change the personality, which is the emulation mode for different kinds of terminals. Critically, it supports VT100, as I mentioned. This is basically the lowest common denominator terminal that everything afterwards settled on the usage. Most virtual Linux terminals are based on the VT100 set of character codes. So if you can emulate VT100, you're set. Now I'm going to leave this set to VT 307-bit mode because for some reason, some of these personalities have different character sets. And this one has a MCIR-inspired character set that is just ridiculously pretty. Then we can go through the other settings here. I have this set to 9600 baud. I think it's actually my USB serial adapter that's limiting it. This can go up to 38,400 baud, but I've not been able to get that work reliably. It does work, but it drops characters, which is just not acceptable. But this gives you all of the settings here that you would expect. So we're going to leave it set to VT300, which is VT100 compatible, by the way. And then we're going to go ahead and leave the menu. Now, as I mentioned, we have aGetty over here, which we can run. So we're setting this to 8 bits, none parity, 9600 baud, and we're telling it which serial port to use and what terminal escape sequence map to use, which is going to be VT100. Once that's run, over on the CRT, we are presented with a login for the computer. Now, the Linux laptop is not necessary to continue using this at all because I can just go ahead and log into here and everything will work just fine. And I got my password wrong. This part's a little annoying. Backspace is not working right here. I'll get to this in a bit, though. Now, we are into an actual terminal, and just, oh my gosh, Amber terminal is amazing. I kind of forgot I was given the option by Philips to go with Amber or the green tube. Now, the green tube actually looks kind of more like a Tektronix oscilloscope green. It's kind of like a teal turquoise color. I thought it was going to be that. I'm really glad I went with the Amber, though. This looks phenomenal, and I don't have that many Amber CRTs. I think maybe actually 2 now. So super duper happy with this, and it's just incredible looking. But more importantly, this terminal works flawlessly with Linux now. I am not normally someone to care about NeoFetch, but it'll show us some of the features here. So on the left, we have intense characters. On the right, we have a mix of intense and dim characters. This is one of those escape sequences that I was talking about that is mapped to the VT100. There's a character that is placed between OS and the colon here, for instance, that tells it to switch from intense to dim character printing. And that kind of thing can be really difficult to get set up when you're trying to figure out a weird terminal like the DT100. So that is where this thing shines. And it makes much more complicated programs like Vim that use N curses work perfectly. I have not had a single terminal survive this without having weird stuff happen. This is doing full screen redraws with complicated character positioning and all of that stuff, and it just works perfectly. I'm so happy with the results of this. There's just one problem though, and let me go ahead and type something to demonstrate it. Now, you'll notice backspace is working here. It's just the login screen that's actually a little wonky about how it supports backspace and stuff. But how do I exit insert mode here? Philips gave me what is known as a deck version of the keyboard. You'll notice that I don't have an escape key. Now, there were different versions of keyboards available for this thing. This is the one that is most like the terminal that this is emulating, which is a WY-520. But that means I don't have an escape key, which is how you get out of Vim. Now, I'm not 100% sure how this works. If we go into the settings here, we can go into, I believe, keyboard over here, and we can do program function keys. Now, I think there's a way to map function keys to different characters in this, but there's no manual scan for this thing. There's only one on eBay, and they want like $50 for it, and it's for an ES model, which I'm not 100% sure what that means. Could be Spanish language, I don't know. But it means that I don't know how to remap keys, and I'm not even sure if I can do it to something like make, say, F1 the escape key. So I'm not really sure what to do at this point. I did get kind of lucky, though, because I found out F11 escapes this. Well, at least it has in the past. All right, F11. Boom. So I'm not exactly sure what that's doing, but it works, so I can go ahead and quit Vim. Now, there are more amazing options buried in this menu, especially for the keyboard here. Key click high. Oh my gosh. Are you guys ready? I don't think you're ready for this. Because if you remember my Televideo 950 video, those terminals had a feature that I thought was the single greatest feature that any terminal has ever had. And this also has it. That's right, it has beep mode. So this thing is ticking every possible box for me. And it even works with weird things that are kind of hard to get working sometimes. Like if we use BYOBU here, we can see this is working great. And more features being supported. We have inverted characters with variable intensity backgrounds. Just how awesome is this? I can go into Vim here. Actually, this might mess up my key mapping, so we'll find out if I can actually escape. Ooh, this is looking even better on here. So BYOBU is probably using screen in the background to remap stuff, and I think it's remapping some characters to be even better. We can try this with screen directly to see if it works the same way. Screen is kind of the cheat code to fix issues with a term cap entry with a terminal. So let's go ahead and try this. Screen is usually a little more performant. It's not quite doing the same thing. Interesting. So BYOBU must be adding its own little special spice on top. Now, for those of you who may see all the Linux nonsense and think, I don't really want to deal with that, I totally get it. Using a terminal for command line stuff like this is definitely not for everyone. There are some novelty programs you can use. So one of the ones that I have here is a client for my Mastodon account that will allow me to see notifications of things that have happened recently through the CLI, which is just kind of cool. So if you aren't doing real work on something like this, which you absolutely could do still, then there is some novelty stuff you can still mess around with. And there is, of course, the best novelty use case for a terminal. And it's pretty convenient because here at my office, I use LTE for my internet for everything. So I don't have a lot of bandwidth. So this is easily the best way for me to stream Star Wars. While we're here though, I think this is a good time to talk about those escape sequences a little bit more. How do you quit Telnet? The answer is Control right bracket. You gotta kind of spam it sometimes here to get it to show up. You do that, which brings you to the prompt for Telnet eventually. And then you type the command quit. There we go. Unfortunately, it treats all the other characters on the line as part of the command, so we're going to quit and then space our way through all that. And there we go. Now, there are other escape sequences that are built in, like Control G is the universal bell that's longer than the just beep for the keys you're hearing. I could go on, but there's plenty of things like that you need to map that make it complicated to support. So you might see things like the keyboard goes from F13 off to F20. Yeah, that's not what we see on an IBM style keyboard nowadays, but those could be remapped to something else if we knew how to do that. Now, the funny thing here is that under the right circumstances, you absolutely could use this to do work. So if I wanted to come in here and make a change to a program, you know, I could add a comment for clarity, and then I can go ahead and write and quit that, and then I could run a git command about it to figure out what's been modified. You could absolutely get real work done, and I know because I still use the terminal a lot. It's not that you need to use the terminal in Linux. Sure, there's some things where you do, but a lot of times it's just quicker, and the ways that certain concepts are expressed just makes more sense to do it in a terminal. But my goal here is not to debate the differences between a GUI and a CLI. They're totally different and they have their places. It's just that this is still usable today, and that is incredibly awesome. I really must thank Philips again for sending this thing, because I'm absolutely thrilled with it. It's wonderful and so much more usable than any other terminal I have. So definitely a huge thank you. Philips also sent me several other things, one of which was a rotary phone that came with the terminal initially, and I'm really appreciative of that as well. There's some cool stuff there. Again, thank you. But I am going to call that here for now. This thing is fantastic, and I'm super happy with it. If you enjoyed this video, then you may want to subscribe to be notified when I release other ones. If you want to help support the channel, you can find me on Patreon. But for now, that's it, and I'll see you next time.